The sedation dart hit the Korrath in the shoulder plate and did absolutely nothing except make it turn around. That was the moment the survey team ran. Tessie Vorn did not run. She stood 40 meters up the canyon shelf, her field pack still on her back, and watched 9 adult scientists and 3 equipment carriers sprint for the rope ladders at the far wall. The Korrath was below them in the basin, enormous, moving in a way that had no urgency in it, and yet covered ground faster than anything that large had any right to. Each of its 4 limbs struck the stone with a sound that traveled up through the shelf rock and into the soles of Tessie's boots. The amber ridge crest along its spine was lit solid, not the slow cycle she had watched from a safe distance for 3 days, but a hard, flat glow like a filament pushed past rated load. It was angry. Tessie had spent enough time watching it to know the difference. She was 14 years old. She was the youngest person on the expedition by 11 years. She was also the only one still standing on the shelf. "Tess," her father's voice came from across the basin, tight with the specific register it took when he was trying not to shout. "The ladder, now." She looked at the Korrath. It had stopped at the base of the shelf. The vertical face was 6 meters of sheer cut stone, no purchase for something that size, and it was looking up, not at the group scrambling for the ladders, at her. The forward-set eyes were a deep amber, ringed with a darker tone she had not been able to see at survey distance, and they had found her face with the precision of something that was used to tracking things that tried not to be seen. She became very still. The Korrath made a sound, not the territorial roar she had heard twice in 3 days. That one traveled the canyon for 2 kilometers and set loose shale off the upper walls. This was lower, a resonance she felt in her jaw and sternum before her ears processed it, like a question asked in a frequency that bypassed language and went straight to the part of the brain that handled fundamental assessments, threat or not a threat. She made a decision. She unslung her pack. She set it on the shelf stone gently and stepped away from it. Her data tablet was in the side pocket. The specimen collection cases were inside. She had brought everything she needed for the kind of study the expedition was here to do. She left all of it on the stone. Then she sat down. Not crouched, not braced to run. She sat cross-legged on the shelf edge with her hands open on her knees and looked at the Korrath looking at her. From across the basin, she heard her father say something that was not addressed to her. The Korrath did not move for a long time. The amber crest light held steady. She could see the shoulder plate now. The sedation dart had struck a thick section of the outer armor and not penetrated the living tissue beneath. The armor plating on this species was arranged in overlapping layers. She had noted in her field observations, dense enough at the crest and shoulder to deflect impact from falling debris in the canyon collapses it apparently occupied itself preventing. Dr. Fenvar had dismissed this observation. Dr. Fenvar was currently on the 2nd rung of a rope ladder, moving fast. She kept her hands open. The Korrath lowered its head. Not all the way, not the submission posture she had seen in the survey files for other large territorial quadrupeds. This was something more incremental. The enormous skull, broad and flat, armored at the crown with the same layered plating as the shoulders, came down by perhaps 30 degrees. The amber eyes stayed on her face. The crest light began to cycle again, slow, deep, regular. Not the emergency flat glow of before. The ordinary pulse she had watched for 3 days, the one she had been mapping in her field notes, because nothing in the expedition's biological database matched its pattern. Tessie breathed. She did not look away. She had learned this from the survey footage. The Korrath broke contact with moving things, tracked stationary ones, and held the gaze of things that held its gaze in return. That last category appeared to be unusual. The footage only showed it twice in 40 hours of archived recording. Tess, her father again, quieter now, he had come back to the edge of the basin. "Don't move." "I'm not moving," she said without raising her voice. The dart didn't penetrate. The armor is too dense at the shoulder. I told Dr. Fenvar that before he fired it. Silence from across the basin. The Korrath shifted its weight. One foreleg moved, a long, slow repositioning that brought it parallel to the shelf face rather than facing it. Not a retreat, a recalibration of some kind. The head was still down, still oriented toward her. She had been watching it for 3 days from the upper survey platform, 200 meters above the canyon floor, while the rest of the team ran instrument arrays and argued about tagging methodology. The debates had been intense. The Korrath was the most significant biological discovery in the Reach System survey history. Category 1 megafauna, apex territorial, no known prior contact record. Dr. Fenvar wanted a tissue sample and a tracking implant. The expedition's charter required one. The expedition's funder required one. The charter also required in Section 14, subsection C, that contact protocols be followed in sequence for Category 1 megafauna, and the sequence had 17 steps, and Dr. Fenvar had followed 3 of them before deciding the rest were procedural overhead. She had read Section 14. She had read it twice. While the team argued about methodology, she had watched the Korrath move through the canyon basin below. She had watched it patrol the eastern ridge collapse, where a slide 3 years old had left a fault line that was still settling. She had watched it move along the collapse edge in a specific pattern, not random, not territorial boundary marking, and she had mapped the pattern and run the numbers and understood what the pattern was. The Korrath was monitoring the fault. When debris fell, it moved to the collapse site and redistributed the material. When the fault showed fresh movement in the survey seismics, it was already there. She had brought this to Dr. Fenvar. He had said the behavior was incidental and they had a timeline to meet. 3 days later, he had fired a sedation dart at a 4-meter-tall armored guardian that had been managing the structural stability of the canyon. They were all standing inside. She kept her hands open. The Korrath made the low sound again. The resonance settled into her chest like a second heartbeat and then faded. The crest light cycled once, the full pattern she had mapped, not a fragment of it, the complete sequence from base to tip and back, and then dimmed to its resting state. The enormous head came down the rest of the way. The flat crown, armored and broad, touched the stone of the canyon floor and stayed there. The 4 legs arranged themselves in the resting posture she had documented on day 1. She heard someone exhale sharply from across the basin. Tessely stood up, slowly without rushing, with the same deliberateness she had used to sit down. She picked up her pack. She did not open it. She put it on her back and stood at the shelf edge and looked down at the Korrath in its resting posture, the amber crest doing its slow cycle, the enormous body arranged with a calm that was nothing like defeat. "What is it doing?" said Dr. Fenvar from somewhere behind her father. "Resting," she said. "That's not." "It's resting," she said again. "It was protecting the eastern fault collapse. We interrupted it. Now it's deciding whether we're worth the continued attention." She paused. "We're not going to collect a sample today." Silence, then her father's voice, carefully neutral. "Tess, we're not going to collect a sample today," she said a third time. "We're going to pack the specimen cases and the tagging equipment, and we're going to do the transit out through the Western Channel. The Western Channel is stable. The Eastern Ridge is not. We are going to move through the Western Channel before the fault settles further and it becomes neither." More silence. "How do you know the Western Channel is stable?" Fenvar said. "Because the Korrath hasn't been in the Western Channel in 72 hours. It's been at the Eastern Fault. It goes where the problem is." She looked down at the animal below her. "It's been doing this the whole time we've been here." The resting posture held. The crest light cycled. She started walking toward the western end of the shelf. After a moment she heard boots on stone behind her, then more. Then, eventually, the sound of equipment cases being lifted and followed. The Korrath did not watch them go. It had oriented back toward the eastern collapse, the massive head lifted now, reading something in the canyon that none of Tessely's instruments were calibrated to detect. She watched it from the western shelf mouth before she turned into the channel, saw the moment it rose from its resting posture, and moved toward the eastern wall with the same unhurried purpose she had spent 3 days mapping. Not a predator, not a territorial guardian in the simple sense. Something older and more specific, the canyon's own maintenance, operating on a schedule that had nothing to do with the survey team's timeline, and everything to do with the particular problem of holding old stone together over geological time. She turned into the western channel. The transit out took 40 minutes. The channel was narrow enough that they moved single file, equipment cases carried vertically, and Tessely led because no one else had read the survey maps as carefully. She had the fault data on her tablet, pulled from the seismics the instrument arrays had been running continuously, and she knew exactly where the channel's stress points were and where they weren't, and she moved through the safe sections with the confidence of someone who has done the work before the crisis requires it. They came out of the channel onto the high plain above the canyon rim as the light started going amber. The survey camp was 2 kilometers north. No one said much on the walk. Her father fell into step beside her halfway across the plain. "The sample," he said. "We didn't need it," she said. "The survey arrays have been running for 72 hours. We have full behavioral mapping, movement data, crest light cycle analysis, acoustic recordings at 4 different frequency ranges. We have more data on Korrath biology than the entire prior survey archive." She looked at him. "We just don't have a tissue sample." He was quiet for a moment. "Fenvar is going to say the charter requires." Fenvar fired a sedation dart at the structural maintenance mechanism for a canyon that 12 people were standing inside, she said. "He can write whatever he wants in the charter notes." Her father did not answer. He walked beside her across the plain in the fading light, and after a while she heard him exhale slowly, the specific sound he made when he was recalibrating, the same sound, she realized, that the Korrath had made on the canyon floor. She filed her own notes that evening in the survey tent, while Fenvar argued with the expedition's charter liaison on the comms unit in the next partition. The notes ran to 14 pages. She indexed the crest light cycle against the seismic data and found the correlation she had suspected. The Korrath's crest cycle frequency shifted measurably before each significant fault event. The shift ran approximately 45 minutes ahead of the seismic reading. It was not reacting to fault movement. It was reading the fault. Something in its biology was tuned to what the canyon did before the instruments registered it. She marked this finding at the top of her index. She also noted in the behavioral log the moment on the shelf, the open hands, the sitting down, the notch running. She noted the Korrath's response, the descent of the head, the crest light returning to its resting cycle, the eventual resumption of the Eastern Patrol. She described it in the careful language she had learned from 3 years of reading survey methodology. Subject demonstrated cessation of threat response upon observation of non-aggressive posture in human observer. Duration of assessment, approximately 4 minutes. Subsequent behavior consistent with return to primary activity. She paused and then added in the margin, "It looked at me the way you look at something that has already made up its mind to leave things as they are. I don't have a technical term for that. I know what it means." The next morning, the seismics registered a significant fault event on the eastern ridge. A collapse segment, 300 square meters, settling cleanly along the fault line. The survey arrays showed the Korrath at the collapse site 43 minutes before the seismics registered the event. It stayed there until the settlement completed. Then it moved to the next section of the fault line and began again. Tessely filed her notes. She did not go back to the canyon. She did not need to. She had already understood the essential fact. The canyon was not empty wilderness awaiting a survey team's classification. It was occupied, managed, and held together by something that had been doing this work since before any of them arrived, and would continue doing it long after they were gone. The expedition departed Heth's Reach 11 days later without a tissue sample. Dr. Fenvar's report described the contact event as inconclusive due to equipment failure. Tessely's supplementary notes, appended to the survey archive, described it differently. They were 14 pages long and cross-indexed to 72 hours of instrument data, and they were read, 3 months later, by a methodology review board that formally amended Section 14 of the Category 1 Megafauna Contact Protocols. Subsection C now had 22 steps. Step 4 was new. It had been drafted, in careful technical language, by a 14-year-old who had once sat down on a canyon shelf with her hands open and waited to see what a thing that size would do when you stopped trying to take something from it. What it did was lower its head. What it did was let them leave. That turned out to be the entire lesson.